Hi, I'm Siren and welcome to Know How Things Work. Today we're here with Oram Miller, who is a certified Building Biology environmental consultant and electromagnetic radiation specialist and is the co-author of Breathing Walls, featuring protocols for the design of a healthy new or remodeled home without mold or chemical outgassing. He received his certifications from the International Institute for Building Biology and Ecology. He provides on-site healthy home and office EMF evaluations for clients throughout Southern California who both have electromagnetic sensitivities, as well as those who just want a healthier home or office. This includes real estate transactions where he's part of the inspection team for clients interested in knowing EMF levels prior to purchase. He's been interviewed on numerous radio programs and podcasts on the topics of EMFs. He writes extensively on the health hazards of EMFs on his website, which is createhealthyhomes.com. All this will be online in the show notes underneath as well. He hosts a webinar series for the Green Home Institute, greenhomeinstitute.org, entitled Reducing Occupant Exposure to EMFs in Residential Construction. And most importantly, he fixed my house. He scanned and fixed my house. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Good to see you again, Oram.
Thank you, Zirin. Good to see you as well.
So I met Oram about 3.5 years ago or so. When most of my, if you've watched my mystery health issues, where I finally got diagnosed with Lyme disease, one of the first things I did was I started having these sensations of, you might even remember this, but I started having these sensations of it was like electrical current in my body, and I thought for sure I was being electrocuted at night or something was funky. I didn't know if we were between some weird power line. Well, it turns out that was the Lyme disease moving into the nervous system. So hey, you learn something every day. But the first thing that I did was I hired an EMF consultant. I wanted to make sure everything was safe in our house, what we could do to make things better. And Oram is the guy. If you're in Southern California, he's the guy you call. And when he came over, it was, I would say you spent 4.5 hours answering questions of mine before we pulled out a single meter. And we'll see how this goes here today, but let me give you a little bit of a brief of what I'd like to accomplish. He's got all these beautiful, crazy tools here. It kind of looks a little like Ghostbusters. And if you don't know what you're looking at, it looks kind of crazy. So what I'd like to do, we're going to do this maybe in 2 sections. What I'd like to do is start with the science, like get into what is actually happening with EMFs, what is happening with magnetic energy coming into your house, coming into your life. Cover some of the home solutions, like look at what's going on in houses. There are even questions I have here from some people online that are a little funky and fun. So if we get to that, we might do a little bonus round or however that works out. Mm-hmm. And then maybe in the second half, get into all of the fixes that you can do. So for anybody, whether you just have a whole bunch of iPhones and iPads and stuff, and what are the safe options you can do, and are these pendants doing anything, and if so, what's the science behind it? And I remember some of those questions from when he came to my house are pretty interesting too. But really that last segment, I want to leave you empowered that you've got some basic science, that we've covered some of, again, we'll take this where it goes. He can talk forever just like I can, but we'll try and give you as much dense information, as many resources as you can do, because I know a lot of people that are sick and trying to get well, they kind of know that this is part of it. And again, to sort of add a little air to this, Dr. Klinghardt refuses to work with patients, or at least when he used to work with patients, now he just trains doctors for Lyme, but he refused to see patients or work with them unless they had spent about 6 months cleaning up their house, cleaning up the EMF, looking at all the problems that are going on in their life, and then turning off the Wi-Fi and, finding the breaker switch in their bedroom. So we're going to cover why that's the case. And at the end of this, I hope to leave you empowered, not only with some specific solutions that you can do, but you live with people. A lot of people that are sick, they live with people that think that this is bullshit. They don't know that this is real information. They don't know the science. So I want to sort of start with loading people up a little bit with some of the science, because even as Dr. Klinghardt says, American dads are hopeless. American dads are hopeless on this topic. They're like, my phone isn't doing anything, my Wi-Fi isn't doing anything. So let's start there. So what's happening? What's the story with EMFs?
Well, EMF stands for electromagnetic field. Actually, technically, the physicists would say it's electromotive force, but it's EMF. EMF stands for electromagnetic field. And right off the bat, that tells you that there is an electric field component and a magnetic field component, which actually are at right angles to each other. And you had to look at even both of those from house wiring, because if you only focus on the magnetic fields without checking the electric fields, you'll miss one of the most prominent EMFs that exists in your house. So as far
as the magnetic field.
No, which is the electric field.
The electric field, okay.
Because magnetic fields are not the most prominent source of EMFs. They're actually probably the least prevalent, but they're the most harmful if they are present, because they will cause cancer.
That's what I remember. Right.
Yeah, yeah. And wiring errors are present in at least a third of the homes in the United States, half the homes in Southern California because of the wiring practices here. I hate to say it. And a lot of people don't realize.
Thanks to the New Deal, all the houses are mold traps, right? Everybody had to get a home, so you make it with the wood spaced apart, and you make it with plastic coated houses. And
it's primarily the vapor barriers. Right,
pretty much how you culture mold in a in a lab.
and then when moisture gets into a wall, it can't dry out within the requisite 36 to 48 hours before it grows to the mycelia stage, where the buds sporulate and all those spores go airborne, and that's and then the metabolic byproducts, the mycotoxins, get airborne and you breathe them in, and that's what causes the symptoms. So if you have a water event, you want to capture that or dry that out within the 36 hours. 24 to 36 hours.
So sorry, I took you off topic, which is easy to do, but
well, as a building biologist, we're trained in. So we have a 5-day seminar on indoor air quality, which is mold, chemical outgassing, radon, asbestos, lead, natural gas, carbon monoxide. Maybe I mentioned that, and that's all in 5 days. And that's the indoor air quality seminar every May, and then every September, August or September, we have the EMF seminar, which I help teach. And that goes over the 4 sources of EMFs, which are electric fields from house wiring, magnetic fields from house wiring, radio frequencies, and dirty electricity. Those are the 4 EMFs that we recognize in the building biology profession. And then there's another seminar in February, which is 5 days on building science and building biology principles. And when you've taken all 3 of those, plus some coursework online and done a case study, you can be a certified building biology environmental consultant. And we encourage people to take that training and do that. And then we have a separate track for people who just want to do EMFs, where you take the building biology principles class, the EMF basic one, and then every 2 years we have the advanced EMF seminar, which I also help teach. And that gives you the electromagnetic radiation specialist certification, and not the indoor air quality
And then
part.
They can be a Ghostbuster too.
Yeah, either way, you can be a Ghostbuster.
So that's great, and we're going to go more into solutions too. At the end, we'll go into a lot of real specific things that he can train you on. But going back to the science of EMF and all the related issues.
Well, EMFs are...
So what do we know? Is it really... So A, is it harmful? And B, if so, how come... And I realize this is a big kind of a two-parter, but... if there's a way to sort of condense it down. So if they're, are they really harmful? And is the science conclusive? And if so, how come we have to learn about this on our own? How come we're not, how come the mainstream isn't telling us about this? I know you have answers to both.
Well, I do. Extensive answers to both of them.
Yes.
So the answer to the first is yes. EMFs have been present with us to varying degrees for a century in the modern built environment. And the whole building biology profession, which originated in Germany after World War II, with the rapid rebuilding of the destroyed housing stock there after World War II. And so these old 500, 1,000-year-old homes that were built with daub and wattle and post and beam construction, which those that were not damaged in the war are still standing today, 500 to 1,000 years later. And those construction methods stand the test of time.
Right.
And they allow for breathability, which means hygroscopicity, which means the ability for moisture to move through without causing damage to these
porous materials and such.
Yeah, you have to do it right so that rainwater stays out, but that the water vapor can migrate through. And that's the principle of our book, Breathing Walls, that the exterior cladding is waterproof, but vapor permeable. It allows the moisture to move through because it's a smaller molecular size than the water droplets of rain. And because every wall will have a dew point in there, and there is moisture in warm air at 68 to 70 degrees. And if your outside temperature is 10 degrees or 0 Fahrenheit, then you have a dew point in that wall. And moisture will migrate in there. You just don't want it to cause mold. You want it to dry out. And so putting plastic on the inside and outside prevents that from happening. So there's the problem with modern walls. Anyway, again, I digress. But for those who have problems with mold, you really need to if you're going to build a house, follow the principles that we recommend to avoid this in the first place, avoid the mold in the first place. Because every building will have a water event at some point in its life. That's from water experts back at the University of Minnesota, where I used to live, and I participated in a lot of conversations and lectures at the University of Minnesota School of Architecture, and that's what they say. That's what they teach. They're right. Every house will have a water event. So our philosophy is, how will the materials handle that when they're built? So we want the materials to dry out within that 24 to 36 to 48 hours, so that you don't go to the stage where mold spores get dispersed throughout the house. I was at a house for EMFs.
You're like me. You can digress for a long time, man.
But
let's go back to EMF, because we didn't answer the question. So what's the science? Like, is it real? Is there danger in EMFs? What's the science? And if so, if it's a problem, how come we're not hearing about it in the mainstream?
Okay, so EMFs have been with us for many years. Back in decades ago, and houses that are decades old have problems with wiring errors, which cause magnetic fields, current on water pipes and other grounding structures, and I'm talking about metal water pipes out under your front yard.
Would a wiring error also be the new way that the wires are sort of not covered in some of the metal around them anymore? They're kind of
plastic.
It's the plastic coating.
That gives rise to electric
materials.
fields.
Okay.
Plastic, so unshielded wiring gives rise to electric fields.
So that's more of a, some of the older building materials might have reduced that.
Yes,
Okay.
and we recommend metal clad wiring for a new home or a rewired, remodeled home to prevent electric fields. The house I worked on yesterday was rewired in the last 2 months with the metal wiring because the electrically sensitive person who lives there wanted to reduce all the EMFs. So even in the day and evening time, we reduced her electric fields from the circuits that are in the walls. We don't recommend that to other people. That's a radical solution, because most people can handle electric fields in the daytime. But electric fields, which is the E of the EMF, this is the electric field, this is the magnetic field, it doesn't matter which way you do it, but they're always at right angles to each other, is the unknown EMF. Nobody in the EMF safety community understands electric fields or pays any attention to it. They don't even know it exists. And if they go around the house with one of these, and I don't mean to single out Alpha Labs here, because they're a good company, and this is the most popular EMF meter out there that people have, and it's only good in our estimation. I don't mean to be critical, but in terms of the levels that we consider to be safe, which are summarized on a page that we have from my website and from the building biology profession here and in Europe, the only EMF that this is good for, as far as we're concerned, is magnetic fields.
Okay.
But electric field, and we have a few magnetic fields here. It says roughly 1.5 to 2 milligauss. But
and what would be causing that?
Well, that's a good question. And we turn this on. This
is. I remember when you came here and measured my house the first time. You thought it was coming off the street because it got more powerful towards the front.
See, and these are actually syncing up. This is a digital.
But back to my question, like, so what? So it's a magnetic field. So what? Explain why that's a problem and what happens when it goes above the safe level. What's happening in the body?
Well, just to finish this, they put it on electric fields and it goes to zero. But we have electric fields in this room, and you see that with this other meter here. Even if I don't touch this, it's 17 volts per meter, which we consider to be an extreme biological risk, because 17 volts per meter is above the 10 volts per meter here on this list here for the Building Biology Evaluation Guidelines in the extreme column for sleeping areas.
Right.
And yet, again, I don't mean to be critical, but if you use this as your exclusive way of even measuring this EMF that most people don't even know exists,
right,
but it's the most common EMF that there is in the house, it's zero. And it's not zero, because the number that shows up here is way down here on this top scale. So it's a matter of degree. And then same thing here. I put this on radio frequencies. It's again zero, because it's this is really 100. This is what the FCC says is safe on the lowest scale here. This is 100 times lower, but that's 10,000 times higher than what we consider to be safe. And so you just go 2 orders of magnitude down, and you're still 4 orders of magnitude higher than what we consider to be safe, which is 10 to 100 microwatts per meter squared. And the lowest that you can measure with this is 100,000 microwatts per meter squared. So you're going to miss radio frequencies at levels that we consider to be harmful with the trifield meter for electric or radio frequency fields. I'm just pointing that out.
Cool, and we'll get into the devices
Okay.
towards the end, but I'm still
then-
back on this question is, so what? If magnetic fields are high, and what's happening in the body? What's
Okay.
the science here?
So,
How can we tell people, like, I remember you explaining this to me in a way that if you have to convince your family to turn off the Wi-Fi, why? What's it doing? What's a cordless phone doing? What's a cell phone doing if I let it on next to my head at night? What's the science here?
so the science is extensive. It has been conducted initially by the military, not only in this country, but Russia and other countries decades ago. It has formed the basis of policies that the military have followed, but that didn't get translated into the commercial sphere. For instance, when cell phone technology was developed by the military in the 50s and 60s, my understanding from Dr. George Carlo and a few other sources is that there was attention to the harm that it caused for the radar operators and the soldiers. But when the cell phone industry got a hold of this, there has been a consistent effort on the part of the industry to downplay the health effects and to only focus on the heating effects, because there is a specific absorption rate, or SAR, 1.6 watts of energy per kilogram of body mass, which was determined according to my sources in the building biology profession. We didn't do the research, but what we understand is that in the military, when studies were done decades ago, they cranked up a radio transmitter next to a cage of animals, rats, and waited till they stopped pressing a bar for food and said, at that point, this is our safe level. Anything below that is safe.
Okay.
And there are biological
Anything above
effects.
that's interfering with his ability to think, or what's it saying?
No, it's a cellular effect.
Okay.
They get so stupefied and so overshadowed and overwhelmed by the field, the radio frequency field in this case, that they no longer want to press a bar for food.
And what's it actually doing? Is it
Well, there are
changing their DNA? Or is it-
yes, there are considerable changes that occur. According to research that has been conducted mostly outside the United States over the last several decades, we have a fourfold increase in leukemia in children. We have mitochondrial effects. We have damage to DNA. The membrane suffers, and we have voltage-gated calcium channels that are being affected, which has to do with communication between cells, the ability of nutrients to get in and waste products to get out. There is fragmentation of DNA. There's a man by the name of Martin Blank, who's a PhD, retired now, from Columbia University in New York, who wrote a book called Overpowered. And what he said was, he came to the Cancer Control Society, which I have spoken at twice here in Los Angeles, but he was a speaker in one of the other years that I wasn't a speaker, but I met him there and heard him speak. We had lunch together with a group of people afterwards. And he said the same thing there that he said at our conference earlier. He said a couple of years earlier that he was a skeptic until he did his own research on the effects of cell phone transmissions at close range at low levels that are below the official threshold value, well below that, many times below that, below the level that causes tissue heating. He saw biological effects.
Right.
And what happened was DNA damage and DNA fragmentation. Now, I was invited to speak on solutions at the Left Forum at a conference that Camilla Reese and the International EMF Alliance put together last May, so that you can see a 45-minute condensation or compilation of the 2-hour presentation that Dr. Martin Blank and Martin Paul and David Carpenter, all professors and an MD in David's case, and one other gentleman in the morning, a 2-hour where they showed the research, including this DNA fragmentation. And then I'm one of the speakers in the afternoon with Emil de Toffel from Less EMF and 2 other speakers, Patty Wood. And so that is a very interesting video to see on Martin Blank and Martin Paul and David Carpenter, because they summarize the research. In fact, Camilla Reese also filmed Martin Blank for a 4-minute video that you can see from the website emfscientist.org. And this website, which the International EMF Alliance helped put together, is a compilation of research by 240 scientists from 39 nations who have done some of the original research on the effects, the health effects on human tissues, particularly at low levels, biological effects that that cause progressive illness in people, headaches, numbness and tingling, ringing in the ears, memory loss, difficulty concentrating, insomnia, restless legs, but particularly neurological effects, brain fog, depression, lethargy, chronic fatigue. These are all things, and I know they match precisely with Lyme. I know that because I have a lot of clients who have Lyme disease, and I know that Dr. Klinghardt says that everyone who he sees has to have an EMF evaluation before he'll even have them come to, as a patient to his clinic. But what the researchers have done, actually, this is another thing from the International EMF Alliance, and you can see these two slides in the PowerPoint presentation that's on my website, createhealthyhomes.com. So this is a slide that shows the physics paradigm. And this is the traditional advice from the experts, the so-called experts, and they are experts in their field, but not so much on the health effects. In fact, their whole mission, well, they would argue with me and say, there's no evidence that there's any harm, because they're only focusing on the heating effects. So it's not like they're trying to do the bidding of industry. I mean, industry has that motive. Right. And that's a whole other story, another rabbit hole. And there is an effort on their part.
And if people wanted to research the initial, wasn't it Motorola in the 90s that had the research done, as I recall, they hired a scientist for millions of dollars, top of his field, very reluctant. He was very reluctant to join, as I recall you telling. And this was in order to get the military technology of cellular phones into civilian hands. They had to prove to Congress it was safe. They hire this guy. He finds out it's anything but.
Oh, George Carlo.
That's the name, yeah.
Well, he was, whatever you think about George Carlo, he was a keynote speaker for my profession in 2008 in Nashville, Tennessee. We had
And as I recall, he found out it was bad news, and then they reported to Congress, hey, it's all good here.
Well,
and this is how they got it.
The story, he told us.
And this is how we got our cell phones today.
Yeah, he was reluctant to. Yeah, he conducted the research. He found all sorts of problems. Froelich effect. He found that these gates, these portals that allow nutrients to come in and waste products to go out, close down whenever the cell phone is close to the cell, because the cilia pick up this influence, and this is called the low frequency information carrying radio wave. That's part of the
right.
You have these two ways. You have the we don't have time.
The high frequency, and then you have a lower one to carry them.
That were married by the military,
right.
And that's part of the technology. Right. That is the technology of how cell phones work, because at the frequency of the voice, it doesn't go very far. There's not enough power for that.
So trillions of cycles, they can push it out over a great distance.
Yes, that's the carrier wave, right? But it doesn't carry information very well, but it has high energy.
Right.
So the problem is the fast frequencies don't have much harm below the SAR, and so we don't disagree with the cell phone industry on that point. But the low frequency information carrying radio wave is what causes the harm, and they don't talk about that. And there is no safe. Carlo told us that his research showed that there is no safe level, and it damages the DNA, it damages the mitochondria, it damages the cell nucleus, the membrane, and this is what his research showed. And when he presented it to them, they said, you can't talk about this, and he resigned, and they confiscated the research. So it's only from the research of others overseas that have corroborated that we know that this is the case, because we don't even know his research except what he's told us.
Right.
And he was our keynote speaker, so we spent a whole day with him, and then 2 hours the following day.
Or something?
Yeah.
Maybe?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
So he's written information about what he saw in that study?
Yeah. So the whole issue is thermal effects versus biological effects.
Right, because you see online people are trying to disprove this. I've gotten this video as many times as anybody else has gotten, where they try and make a piece of popcorn pop with the.
Oh, that was faked.
Of course, and that was the whole idea, was to debunk it by showing that it.
Well, okay, so here we have.
You can't pop a piece of popcorn, so it must be safe.
Must be safe,
right? Just like DDT and kids running behind the.
Well, because we're
formaldehyde in our houses.
Because we're all using it, it must be safe.
Exactly. Yeah.
But a third of the population Actually, according to Dr. Blank, Martin Blank, he said 100% of the cells in close proximity have DNA damage. That's what his research showed at Columbia. He said, I was a skeptic until I did my own research. And that's why he's the one that you see when you go to emfscientist.org. And they actually put out a press release to the UN and the World Health Organization in May of 2015 saying this is a health crisis that you need to pay attention to.
How many countries now are, because I remember you saying something about, I think, Israel and maybe
10.
That are putting the warnings on the cell phones when you purchase a cell phone.
Yes.
They
Israel
have like
is doing
health
that.
hazard thing, like a pack of cigarettes.
Now, France voted 2 years ago to ban Wi-Fi in all daycare centers and nurseries for children under 3.
Right.
And if you are a grade school teacher, you have to turn off the Wi-Fi when it's not in use. If you are a mayor and a cell phone company in France approaches your city and says, I want a permit for this neighborhood to put up a cell phone tower, which they have to do there and here, he's obligated by this law to alert the citizens. They can come and they can raise their objections. And if they don't want this to be put up for health reasons alone, not just other reasons that are brought up, the city council can vote to deny this based on health alone.
Right.
That is illegal in the United States. The cell phone companies got a provision, I think it's 704, into the Telecommunications Act of 1996, in a Democratic Congress under Bill Clinton, a Democratic president, that says you can bring up health at a city council meeting. And I did so, and I heard parents do the same thing in Orange several years ago, Orange, California here. But the city attorney, at the beginning of that part of the agenda for the city council meeting, said, I need to advise all of the participants in the audience that this council cannot vote to deny a permit for this Verizon cell tower in this neighborhood based on health concerns alone. That's illegal. So it begs, and this whole 5G thing that's going on right now, which is 5th generation cell phone technology, part of the law that's about to be voted on in the Senate today, I believe, or right this week, is the provision that local jurisdictions, local neighborhoods, and even states will not be allowed to override any decision that's made on the national level in collaboration with the cell phone companies, because this is the rollout of this is part of the national defense and part of the national infrastructure of the United States. So they're taking it out of local control.
Got it.
Why would they need to do that? What does France know that we don't know? And the French Parliament did not do this because of pressure from angry moms. They did this because of the research. So what the research shows is that if you look solely at the physics model,
people won't be able to see this, but you go to your site and download it.
You go to
a presentation on his site.
You go to the video under EMF lectures and EMF slides and lectures, and you look at the PowerPoint. You'll see this slide and this slide. And what this one says here, this is the traditional EMF safety community, made up of the International Electrical and Electronics Engineers, International Commission for Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, and World Health Organization, EU Commission. And their history is electronics. These are engineers and physicists. Their background is applied technology. Their objectives are acute safety of EMF technology. That's their objective. And the focus is acute risk of short-term, high-level exposure. Their action pathways are electrical potentials, currents, and heating of tissues. That's what they focus on.
Which reminds me, wasn't there a study you told me about where they rats were observed and they made a cell phone call next to the rat, and within I just remember it being in under a minute or something, it changed like the DNA or something permanently. It made some permanent change in the rat at the time.
I didn't mention that to you. I'm not aware of that study.
Okay.
It could be present.
By the way, you were the one that had me police all my friends on cell phones and such too. And I just, because we don't do it. We're in the habit of saying gesundheit when somebody sneezes, but everybody puts their phone on in their pocket against their body, right against their reproductive organs.
I'll get to that in just.
That's made me the policeman for all my friends, and I hope it's a tradition that carries out. I hate to be the bad guy, but I think it's one of these things we need to start learning behaviors. These are not benign devices around us.
Correct. So I'll get that in just a second. Just let me finish this because this is important. So their calculation of safe exposure levels, which is the level that the FCC has settled upon in 1997, is based on theoretical models. It's all based on tissue heating And that's it. Nothing more. So this is the physics paradigm. And look at how much input these guys have on policy. It's huge. Because as a corporation, you can make a lot of money from the guidelines that these guys have set. If you look over here, this is the emerging EMF health community, which is a biology paradigm. And these are made up of integrative life sciences and experimental biologists. That's their background, it's integrative life science, not applied technology. These are not engineers. These are researchers and clinicians. Their objective is not short-term high-level exposure, but long-term effectiveness of EMFs, long-term influences of EMFs on health. Their focus is long-term risk of prolonged low-level exposure. And then their action pathways are not tissue heating, but rather heterogeneous bioaccumulation of disruptors on the cellular level. And their method of calculating safe exposure levels are based on measuring EMF-induced biodisruptors because of the biology paradigm here. Look how much input they have on policy. Tiny bit. Because you can't make money with the guidelines that these guys recommend.
Yeah, so this is basically a shield so that industry can have its way.
Well, it's just explaining the realities. Corporations rule. This is a corporatocracy.
Yeah.
The CDC, the FDA, the EPA, the NIH, NIH is somewhat independent, but the other three organizations, agencies, according to Robert Kennedy Jr., the EPA is a sock puppet of the pharmaceutical industry. That was the exact words that he used on Coast to Coast AM a year or two ago. I know that the FCC is terribly compromised. They do exactly the bidding of industry. Yeah. Granted, Tom Wheeler was against net neutrality, and I appreciate that in him. But when it comes to health, it's all anything that we say in the EMF safety community falls on deaf ears. It falls flat because as far as they're concerned, they want to provide access to the internet to everyone in all socioeconomic levels, and we're not opposed to that. It's not the access to information. It's not the access to media and it's just how you do it. What is the delivery method? Is it wireless or wired? If you go hardwired, you avoid this. So the analogy that I use is that your router, your cordless phone base unit are both always on, and they're like ashtrays with burning lit cigarettes, filling the room with smoke. So night and day. And the problem is, I'm old enough to remember what it was like in the 50s and 60s when you had chain smokers. And not everyone got emphysema or died of lung cancer, but 40% did, according to some estimates. So those were your odds. Not good at all, and more than a third. And today, the same is true. It's estimated that that 100% of cells are affected, according to Dr. Blank and others, but about a third of the population goes on to develop symptoms from that, which I mentioned before: numbness and tingling, ringing in the ears, brain fog, memory loss, and so on. And the other 2/3, why are they not symptomatic? Because they can repair the damage at night when they sleep. Now, there are other EMFs. One of the things that makes the building biology profession unique is that we focus on things that are slightly different than what the EMF safety community focuses on. What the EMF safety community mostly focuses on, and I'm not being critical here, I'm just making an observation, is cell phones and smart meters, smart electric meters.
Which we have an interesting thing on smart meters.
Which we can talk about, yes. Chips and pendants that you're wearing and that have an effect on the way the physiology reacts to these fields. It doesn't reduce the fields, but it changes the way human tissues react to the fields. The third thing would be dirty electricity, from Dave Stetzer. So his meters and his filters, and Greenwave is another company, and there are others on the market. And then the earthing mats that Clint Ober has come up with. So these are the four things that people know about. What we know about in the building biology profession is electric fields, magnetic fields, radio frequencies, and dirty electricity. And to us, electric fields are the most common EMF, although cell phones are coming up now, but for decades, electric fields are and continue to be the most prevalent EMF because you have them in every bedroom.
Right. Because
the electric field is from voltage, not from current. So even when you turn the light off, the pressure is still there, just like the pressure of water in a garden hose. So this field comes out 6 feet and then to 8 feet from your unshielded plastic insulated circuits, the Romex circuits in your wall, right through the sheetrock, and the plastic cords that you plug in for your lamp and clock and other things that are within 6 feet of your body. And it comes out 6 feet and then collapses. Comes out 6 feet and collapses. But because a sine wave goes, here's the zero crossing point, so it goes positive, then negative, then positive, then negative. So this is one cycle, positive and negative. That's one cycle, a positive half and a negative half. And that happens 60 times a second. So you have 120 times a second, you have this field going out and back, but it alternates between positive and negative polarity. So this field comes out from the wall and from multiple directions, from the wall behind your head when you're laying on your back, from the side, from the lamp cord, maybe another circuit underneath your legs, from underneath, maybe on a different phase, so they're out of phase with each other. All these fields are pulling at your charged particles in your cells. So all the ions there, sodium, potassium, magnesium, and calcium and so on, are all positively or negatively charged. So they're going to be pulled in one direction or pushed, attracted or repulsed based on the polarity of the field. So there's this agitating influence that goes on all night long.
Your body's trying to sleep, and
you can't sleep because you're walking down. It's like walking,
shake and baked.
It's like walking down the street in a hurricane, and you're buffeted. Push this way and then push this way. And it's like a drunken sailor. You can't walk straight down the street. Your cells cannot do what they're supposed to do at night. So you never get into stage 4 sleep and stay there for very long, every 90 minutes when you go through your sleep cycles. Right. So you don't release melatonin, and you don't get into deep stage 4, so that's why you wake up tired. And in the daytime, where we're all exposed to electric fields all day long, because we sit within 6 feet of plastic cords from behind us in the wall and the cords that are plugged in. But we can tolerate that. Most healthy people, even some electrically hypersensitive or EHS people, can tolerate that in the daytime, but not at night. Everyone used to shut these things off at night. So that's what we do. We do a test where...
and for people that are unhealthy, obviously you want to minimize everything as much as possible, even in your waking hours.
Yes, especially where you sleep.
Sorry, keep going.
So in the daytime, the thing about electric fields is that if your computer is plugged into, has a plug that is 2-pronged instead of 3-pronged, then it's ungrounded. And half of the PCs that are out there, laptops primarily, have a 2-pronged plug instead of a 3-pronged plug. And your outlet has to be 3-pronged as well. So that's what this is good for. This is a circuit tester here that you plug this in, and this light will come on, meaning that the hot is live.
And these are great because they come, if you ever buy any earthing mats or anything,
get one of
they
these.
actually,
yes.
They come with it. So
and this is the ground. And you never want the red, if the red light comes on, then you can't tell what the ground is doing. And it means that the hot and neutral are reversed, and that's not an EMF issue, but you have to get the electrician out to fix that. And you can't tell if the ground is good. So if the red light is off, which it should be, this is on, and if this comes on, then it's grounded. But it has to be as bright as the middle one. If it's dim, it's loose, and it's not good. It's as if it wasn't there. So that's necessary for your computer. Now, if you have a 2-pronged plug, and you use a cheater plug, which I have in the box there, but
right,
where you put 3 here and you have 2 on this side with a little cord, well, you can ground that properly if you have metal pipe in the wall or metal conduit. But anyway, electrician can do that. But the point is, if your plug on your computer is only 2-pronged, or you have a Mac, and you have the white box, which is the transformer, and then you have the cord which is in the box with a 3-pronged plug on it, which you should slide onto that and use. But some people say, no, I don't want that. Cords are ugly. I want the adapter that I can slide on here, and 2 little blades swing out, and then you can plug the white box, your transformer, into the power strip or the surge protector or the wall. You have now created an ungrounded computer. And people say, why do I feel so tired when I put my hands on this for a few hours? It's because you have extraordinarily high electric field levels. That's why.
So the grounding really does
absolutely
make
necessary
the hugest difference.
For whatever you put your hands on. Yes, your computer must be grounded.
I even, I was laying down on one of these, it's like the Beamer mat. People get the Beamers these days, but we ended up with an EMRS mat.
Yeah.
And I was using one of the magnetic pulsars, which isn't a grounded device. And I was wearing a pair of earphones that are Bose earphones. I had my cell phone and everything off. And it would actually hum into my earphones whenever I would lay back on the mat and use the any kind of ungrounded accessory.
Interesting.
on the mat. Like that was maybe how much was coming off. And
Well-
you're saying that would somehow be mitigated with a grounding.
Well,
So anytime that's an option, you want to go for the
yeah,
grounding.
but there's a
plug.
problem with that. All right, so I'm asked to evaluate mats that are plugged in, they're electric, that some people sleep on all night long,
Yeah.
and saunas all the time. And so the manufacturers of mats and electric mats and saunas claim that they are EMF free because they've been tested. They have certificates from the organization in Europe that certifies that it's low EMF, and they're talking about magnetic fields. They're not paying attention to the electric fields. They don't even know about that. So, and they don't think that it's important, but it's very important. So I've had the medical director of one of these companies called me up and said, "You're scaring our customers. Please stop doing that." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, the lady that you were at the other day, she called up and she wants her money back after a year for one of these mats." I said, "I didn't tell her to call you." And he said, "Well, you told her that these things have high EMFs." I said, "Well, they do." And he said, "No, they don't. We've got that certified." And I said, "Well, you're talking about magnetic fields, but there are electric fields." So I spent an hour with this guy. And after an hour, he said, well before that, he said, "You're right. I realize you're right." And all the models in Europe and the Middle East are grounded right through to the mat. And he said, "Our American models are not." Now, I was at a client's house just a week ago, and they have a mat where this lady laid on. It's an amethyst mat, and it is grounded. There's a 3-prong plug. But the grounding only goes to the box and does not convey to the mat because that mat had high electric fields. So you have to design it so that the grounding goes all the way to the mat itself. Now, sauna manufacturers have the same issue.
Right.
They all
I've
have
heard
their
about this
certificates
too.
that saying that they're low EMFs. Well, my clients who are aware of the electric fields and feel their effect do not feel well in these saunas because they're unshielded wires. So I called 2 of them, Heavenly Heat, Bob Morgan, and Raleigh Duncan at Clearlight, and talked to them, and they said, "We want to do whatever we can," and they know I'm a building biologist, and I talked to them about this, and both of them went to their engineers, and in Bob Morgan's case, he said, "I talked to the guys in Japan, they knew instantly what needed to be done." "Oh yeah, we can do that for you." So they completely re-engineered the wiring with shielded wiring, and so everything is grounded now, and it's shielded, and there's no electric fields or very low electric fields in both companies. And Clearlight actually brought a colleague of mine and his company, Alex Stadner's company in San Francisco, into their company in, I think, Oakland, to measure this. And if you go on their website, they actually have pictures of the guy sitting in there with both a meter like this, which is an NFA 1000 from Gigahertz Solutions, in the electric field mode, 3-axis electric field mode in volts per meter, and also the body voltage method, which uses one of these. I don't have it out, but it is a voltmeter with a handle or a cylinder that you hold, and then because that's an antenna, because it's grounded to earth, and when you hold it, your body is like the antenna, and so you're measuring in millivolts. It's another way to measure electric fields, which we use all the time for measuring electric field exposure in sleeping areas. So the guy is sitting in there. You see his photograph holding on to this thing, and you see how the numbers are really low. So I give these guys credit for doing this, because now Raleigh says on his website for Clearlight that it's EMF free and ELF free. Now, technically speaking, ELF means extra low frequency. It's the bandwidth for 60 cycles per second. But both electric and magnetic fields from wiring is at 60 cycles. So technically, they're both EMFs, because the magnetic field is the M of the EMF and the electric field is the E of the EMF. And they're both at 60 cycles, which is in the ELF band. So those 2 terms apply to both types of fields. So I don't want to confuse people on that. We just call it magnetic field EMFs and electric field EMFs in the ELF band in both cases. That's the correct way to describe it technically for both of those things. But the point is, now electrically sensitive people go into those saunas and they feel good because they don't have the electric fields anymore. And this is the unknown EMF. I have clients who call me up, several of them, who say, "I'm not sleeping well, and it has to be the smart meter, but I opted out because we can do that here in Southern California." Well, then it has to be the smart meter from my neighbor, across the yard. It has to be.
Right.
They're convinced of that because that's what they read on the internet. And I just nod my head and I say, "Well, let's measure."
I remember when you came out here, we have all the things, this is a great thing for misconceptions too, maybe we can segue into that. But I remember all of the things that I was concerned about, like, because there's a great movie called Take Back Your Power about the EMFs.
Well, we know Josh very well.
Coming off the smart meters. Yeah. But, you know, so you get it in your head. I'm living in an apartment above like a bank of like 80 of these things directly. There's one unit below me, and then there's 70 or 80 smart meters, right, that were all installed in the last few years. However, all those things that I was sort of worried about, you came in and most of those things were mitigated. We went down there, it was a different brand than the one that's up in Northern California and that's in the Vancouver area where the movie was made.
Well, no, actually, Itrons is what we have here is there in Southern California with Southern California Edison. It's Itron. That's one of 6 manufacturers of smart meters. Actually, Vancouver has Itrons also. I don't know about...
So go for it. Talk about the smart meters.
Well, I will. Let me just finish this other point. Then I showed this lady what breakers to shut off. And
oh, I see.
And the next day, I got an email saying, I slept
I'm better
for the first time in years. You were right. It wasn't my neighbor's smart meter. In this case, it was the
But that's what I mean,
fields.
The paranoia over this.
There is... So
doesn't mean that they're wrong.
No, they're right. Smart meters are terrible.
But sometimes there's a much different... That's what I found out was that I was working under the office light. We were working in the kitchen. We don't have the dining room. Is not like a normal dining room. That's my office space. So, and there's a lamp coming down from the ceiling, which would have hung nicely over the middle of the dining room table, and I use it. It hovers maybe a foot off my head, and you found, I remember, huge amounts of electrical energy coming in. Yeah.
Electric fields, yes.
Huge field coming off of
that. Well, the body voltage meter is less than $100.
And then we went down to the smart meters. You're like, see, it's not really anything. It's not even getting up to what it is.
Yeah, for my clients and for me as a practitioner here, and for those other individuals who go through the training and who are in Southern California, and other people around the country and Canada who have Itron smart meters, I say something that is heretical in the smart meter circles, and they don't like me for saying it because I say, well, you know, the smart meters, the Itron smart meters that I deal with are not as strong, nor are do they send out beacon signals as often as the other manufacturers do in other parts of the country, including San Francisco and Northern and Central California, where Pacific Gas and Electric is, which was one of the first utilities to put smart meters in place 4, 5, 6 years ago. And because so many people got sick, because they set the levels so high, below the threshold that the FCC says is safe, but still very high. And in California, we don't have basements, so the smart meter, the electric meter and electric breaker panels are outside, usually on the back of the house, sometimes on the side where the garage is, but in older houses on the back, and that's where the bedrooms are. So and of course, there's magnetic fields, always has been and still is. You still have that. And if you have wiring errors, you have magnetic fields not only coming out 2, 3, 4 feet into the bedroom from the meter and from the breaker panel when loads are on, which drops somewhat when the loads go down. But if you have wiring errors or current on the water pipes or grounding paths, you're going to have that magnetic field right under your bed on the circuits that go through the walls and under your floor and overhead in the crawl space and to the other parts of the house. So there's a whole host of reasons why you don't want to have a bedroom next to a meter, even for decades before the smart meters were introduced. That's just added insult to injury. But nobody pays attention to that other stuff. So smart meters are then put on there, and a lot of people got sick because the levels were so high and so often. And the presumption is that every smart meter in the country, every manufacturer is the same. Most of them are, but they're not all the same. Itron is not, but I'm not going to belabor that because that's only unique for those of us who are here in Southern California.
Can you list? Yeah, I was going to say, is there like a? If people are paranoid about their smart meters or wondering if they're curious, let's say curious. Paranoid is the wrong word. Are there different brands, or maybe you could list them in terms of like this brand is closer to biologically friendly. This brand is
no. They're all bad.
They're all bad. All right.
But here are the 6 manufacturers in the United States, and this is as of a few years ago. This is their market share. So we have Landis+Gyr, Itron, Sensus, GE, Elster, and Echelon. They're all bad because they all send out.
Is this on your site? You said somewhere too?
Yes, this is on the smart meter page.
Okay.
And this is not my. This is Tom Wilson's presentation that he put together for the building biology profession to be that he taught at one of the seminars.
And when you say high, is it like the equivalent of like having a Wi-Fi device broadcasting or a cellular phone?
It depends.
Or which is it?
It depends.
Okay.
Because you see, these manufacturers, I've always wondered who set the levels. Is it the manufacturer or is it the electric utility? And I believe it's the manufacturer, because I've seen consistency, for instance, with the Itrons. They're all the same all over the country as I measure here, which tends to be lower than GE and Landis-Gyr and some of these other companies. The others tend to be higher. And but none of them are good. It's just less of a bad thing.
Right.
And it's very sharp. And what happens is these things transmit a day's worth of data once or twice a day, sometimes more often.
So they have a big
to each
jump
other.
somewhere in there.
There's a mesh network. It either goes to receivers on telephone poles or to other houses, and there's a mesh network to get this information to the central office. But then during the day, 24/7, there are beacon signals. These things are programmed to send out a signal with no data, just I'm on, and can you hear me? And I asked the head of the whole network here at a meeting, why do they do that? And he said to keep the network healthy. That was his response, to synchronize these meters. And also so that they know if a meter is not reporting, they know your power's out. And they go out and check it out before you even come home. They know before you do that the power's out in your house. Now, the thing is, there's all sorts of problems with this. There's the bills are too high, so it's not accurate in some cases. Fires have occurred. It causes problems to the electrical systems, surveillance.
And that's been in the mainstream.
I know.
They've been trying to decoy the surveillance thing.
Yeah. So there's
Stephen Colbert sticking his head in his microwave, saying, "Are you spying on me?" or whatever. I saw some of that going around.
So many reasons.
But yeah, these are really legitimately spying on. They're tracking in when you're home and using stuff. When you're not, and then they're set up for much more robust information in the future.
All right. So that's what they're programmed to do. So
you can watch the movie and learn about all that.
Well, and there is evidence that there is monetization of this information that these utilities are able to do.
So are there any shields that work, or do people just have to pull these things out?
No, there are many shields that work. Smart Meter Guard works fairly effectively. And you can put shielding on the inside of the wall as well as outside. And the interesting thing is, the company still gets their signal, even though it has this guard which drops at like 99%. So it shows you that it's overkill. It's more than you need. Same thing, we put a router guard on top of the router, a cloth or a metal box. For those clients of mine who don't want to give it up, or somebody in the family can't go without the Wi-Fi, so we put it away from the kids and away from the person who's sensitive, who brings me in.
Lovely. Yes.
And we have to work out a compromise in that case. And so we reduce it, and they can all still connect. It's overkill.
Right.
It's just how many rooms can you push through with these
This just limits
things.
the distance, but that it'll reach. Okay.
The bottom line with all of this is a technology that is flawed. It has health consequences, and it causes harm to 100% of cells in close contact. The question is, can you recuperate? Can you heal those cells afterwards? That's what it all boils down to. I tell my clients, you have to ask yourself, how many cigarettes are you willing to smoke on a daily basis? That's what it boils down to. And one guy said 2. I said, okay. And then a year later, I came back to check his house out again. And the whole time I'm there, he's on his phone texting. And I said, you're not smoking 2 cigarettes a day. You're smoking a pack a day by the amount of time that you're using this. But remember, by the odds, there are people who use these technologies who have no symptoms. They can't see it or smell it, like with tobacco. But even with chain smokers, more than 50% of chain smokers did not develop illness of any kind. So there are people in this world who have used these things for many years, decades, and will use them for decades, and will never get any symptoms whatsoever. Probably the majority of the population. The problem is, for healthy people, quote unquote, a third of them are known to have symptoms right now from these devices today, and for the last few years now. That their doctors are not related. They and their doctors do not make the connection. Then you have the electrically sensitive community, which is 3 to 5%. But really, again, I work. 70% of my clients are electrically sensitive, and 2/3 of them are symptomatic. So that's half of the people I work with. But they only represent 3 to 5% of a nation's population. But a third of any given population has symptoms, and 100% are getting harm to the cells in close proximity to these things. So, it's a roll of the dice.
Now, now we talk about how some of these people are able to recuperate and don't appear to have symptoms, but isn't there a case to be made too? Is there any studying on genetically over time? Are they some of these animal studies where they show
about that? I don't know about genetics, but he said that well, actually, in terms of the cells.
Because you mentioned it broke the DNA. I mean, that would mean you'd pass that on. You might pass some of those.
Yes, that's how mutations are created. In terms of the DNA effects, if you look at that presentation that was given at the Left Forum, Dr. Martin Blank and Martin Paul, particularly Martin Blank, talked about the DNA fragmentation that occurs. And he did the research on this at Columbia, which is where Carlo was prior to that, by coincidence. And they are finding harm. So, we can talk to her blue in the face. I have clients who are electrically sensitive even, who hire me, and they'll change these other things in their house. They'll have me come back with an electrician and fix the wiring errors. They'll shut off the breakers that we identify that where the circuits run through the walls and the floor and the ceiling of their room to drop the electric fields. I can put in filters and reduce their dirty electricity. But when it comes to and they'll shut off the Wi-Fi at night. But they won't stop using their phone during the day. And I know that it's all a matter of compromise. I present the information and I say to people, if I've done my job right, you'll have a serious conversation after I leave or in the next few days. You'll look at these things, don't take my word for it, look at these sources that I give you, and especially outside the United States, and come to your own conclusion and make a decision of how far you want to go with this. And so if I've done my job right, you'll make these changes and then you'll thank yourselves 5 to 10 years from now or 20 years from now when you get a call from your friend who says, my son was just diagnosed with a brain tumor. Because you'll know that you made this change back in 2017 or 2016 or 2015 when I came in there or one of my colleagues to show them what's going on. And so that's what we can do with our meters and instruments. This measures electric fields and magnetic fields. This measures radio frequency fields, and then we can measure dirty electricity with a Stesser meter like this. So we know what the EMF levels are in each room in the house. And the whole time that any of us are doing this evaluation, and I'm one of the teachers for my students, we teach them, we're always thinking of solutions.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
So there are solutions to every one of these things. And then...
That's what I loved about it. When you went through my house, and we're going to go a little into overtime here, just a couple minutes, because we're at about an hour for part one. And I know we could talk about this stuff all day, but just to sort of...
Solutions. Then.
Yeah, just to sort of wrap this piece up, when we went through the house, when he inspected my house, it wasn't big bucks to fix this stuff. It wasn't huge inconveniences. Like the alternative to Wi-Fi is Cat5 cable, which, by the way, is a more reliable, steady connection.
And you need
to turn the breakers off in the bedroom. It was to move the bed away from a shared wall and to another apartment that we don't have control over what was over there.
Because there's an electric field coming through that shared wall.
Plus you detected that they had a cordless phone,
but you can shield for
doing that. Right, so we moved the bed against the other wall so that our heads would be against a wall that would be quiet. We'd turn the breakers off. Again, these are all free solutions. These were not expensive fixes and repairs. Even the earthing mats, even the room we're in right now, it's of course high with EMF because we have little body packs transmitting our vocals and stuff. We have lots of cameras and lights going on and huge amounts of electrical cords unshielded running around us. But essentially, I know better. I know not to sleep in this, in this kind of a place. I know that we make the room quiet and all those things are easy fixes. Are there, first, again, since we're just going into overtime, maybe we can try and do these kind of quickly, but what are the major misconceptions about EMFs?
Well, I need about 10 minutes. I'd like to go into that in the next segment because there are several that I'd like to cover. But the bottom line is all the things that you mentioned are good. Earthing mats are good. The chips and pendants, which we'll talk about in the next hour, are good. We just don't recommend that people use them as their sole or exclusive or primary way of protecting themselves.
I remember when I asked you about that too, when you were here, and I think people had reported online some of the questions they wanted to ask, and that was one of them that came up.
Yeah, I want to go into that.
And I was like, that was great, because I remember when I asked you about that, I said, what's the deal with these? And is there science to back them? And you're like, yeah, not really, but you had like a whole string of them on.
No.
Well, I remember it wasn't that the science was inconclusive, or it was just more.
I have one of those on my older phone. No, there is actually good science to that.
Okay, and I figured that was a few years ago too. So new stuff is probably.
We're not. Well, they don't change the level because this never changes.
Right.
I don't care what anybody says. Now, there's a guy who's always at the Cancer Control Society. And he has a meter. It's one of these very inexpensive black and red with a red dome on the top, and it measures magnetic and electric fields. Okay, and it beeps and flashes red when it's in a field, and so he puts a cell phone. Has a cell phone. Just has the person come along, and the thing beeps, and it has a little cord, and a little thing that has a pickup, and when he puts that near the cell phone, this thing beeps, and then he puts this chip in there. And it doesn't beep.
Right.
But it's magnetic fields that he's picking up. And I don't know how that thing that he puts on
measuring
there,
it's
I have no idea. And I said to a guy, he's not measuring RF.
Yeah.
Because for that little device to measure radio frequencies, you have to pull that cord out, and then you're measuring radio frequencies. And there's no way that these chips reduce the field. Because a few stalls down, someone was selling more of these things. And I got out my cordless phone, which is in a bag right behind me here. I plugged it in. Actually, before I plugged it in, I said, now everybody, actually I did plug it in. And then I turned this thing on, and I was about 3 feet away, and I said, you hear the sound, you hear the volume of the sound, you see the number, that's what it's producing. And then I shut this off, and I unplugged it, and I said, now everybody, put your chips on top of these things. Put all your chips and all your things you're selling, load them up. And then I plugged it back in, turned this thing back on, no change in the RF level. There never is a change.
Right.
That's not how they work. The way they work is when they're on the phone or when they're near you, they do change the way you respond to these fields. The way they work, from what I understand, I'm not a proponent of them per se, but I'm not an what's the word? I don't object to them either.
Sure.
The way that I understand that they work is they generate a field of coherence using scalar technology in some way, and there's some grounding that some people claim and other things, and everyone says, literally, ours is the best, and none of the others work. Everyone says that. And I get somebody calling me up every 2-3 weeks saying, you got to sell my things because it'll take care. So it's like they want me to drop everything I'm doing and just sell their chip.
Yeah. I'm
not going to do it. Because there's too much else that needs to be taken care of. In fact, the analogy that I use is if you have a room with 4 ashtrays with burning lit cigarettes, filling the room with smoke, and a guy comes along and says, I have an air purifier that you can plug in and it will clear the room with smoke. It does. But you haven't gotten rid of the ashtrays.
Exactly.
We know how to get rid of the ashtrays. We try and convince people to do so if it's these devices that they're using and go to hardwired connections. So we're trying to reduce the field, the source of the fields in the first place. And I think that's a better approach. Now, when you go out, you're going to have a lot of fields. And in your home, you still have fields coming in. And there are people who are very sensitive.
The intention is
it's a good thing.
Changes the way the body reacts.
It does. Yeah. And so...
is there a way to measure that at all?
Not with these things.
Okay. But somebody can measure it somehow.
Okay. The 4 things that I know about are DNA damage in rats, 2 cages of rats, 2 cell phone. Well, first of all, they had no cell phone, and these rats had more DNA damage than these because of the cell phone. Then they had 2 cages with two rats, 2 cages of rats, and two cell phones, one with a chip and one without the chip. This group of rats had less DNA damage than this. How do you explain that? There is an effect. Secondly, thermography. Blues and you have cool colors after you put the chip on. Before the chip, without the chip, the cell phone will heat up the tissues, and that's the whole SAR thing, specific absorption rate. You have reds and yellows and oranges showing that there's the heat in those cells. You put the chip on there, you have blues and greens. I don't know how that occurs, but it does. And thirdly, red blood cell analysis. You take a drop of blood, put it under a microscope, dark field microscopy, and you see the red blood cells, and normally they're slippery and they're biconcave, and they carry oxygen, and that's how we get our oxygen through the body.
Healthy ones, yeah.
Right, healthy ones. They're slippery, all right, for good oxygenation of the tissues. In the presence of these cell phones, they start to
like hexagonal and such and jagged,
and they get sticky, and they stack up like a stack of coins, and it's called rouleau formation. And so that's what happens with the cell phone. So that's the before. When they put a chip or a biodot, I really respect Dr. Elizabeth Plourde, Plourde, who's here in Irvine, California, Tustin, right, not far from where we are, and she's electrically sensitive, and I helped her in her home, and she says that she agrees, but the biodot that she got from England made her be able to tolerate much more being around these things that she couldn't tolerate before, even with the changes that I made, which helped a lot. So she now sells this, and she and I have both spoken at the Cancer Control Society, and she has this slide that shows before and after. Here's the stacking, and over here with the biodot in place, and this is true for other companies as well, other chips, it spreads out. These things start floating free again. There's a change in the way that the way that the red blood cells.
So there is some science behind
Absolutely.
this. We're not just wearing these because
no. There is science to it.
No, I remember one of my alternative doctors gave me this one, and I like wearing it just because I like it. I like the look of it and such, and I know it's not hurting me, and if it's helping me, that's great.
It's helpful. Well,
let's do this. We're going to wrap up part one now, and we'll come back and we'll do the second part where we get into solutions for the home, things you can do specifically to make your home more safe, some easy things you can look out for, and then we're going to go into solutions for other things, alternative Wi-Fi and things that make your cell phone safer, and then more resources and such to leave you with plenty of ammo to learn how this can affect you and how to make things a little bit better in your life. So, all right, we'll be back in a little bit.
Okay.
Thank you for watching Know How Things Work. If you enjoyed the show and you want to contribute to it, there are links below. You can donate for as little as $1 a month. Otherwise, if you like the music that's in the background right now, it's yours truly. That's all this stuff helps the show out. Make sure you subscribe in the upper right corner, wherever it is on YouTube these days. And thank you so much for watching. I'm Siren. This is Oram. Guys, have a great day. Thanks for coming.
Everything I said, raising bruises by the skull.